Welcome to meeting number 43 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of June 23, 2022. We will begin in public to hear testimony from witnesses. Following that, we will go in camera to discuss committee business. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. Finally, a reminder that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection test in advance of the meeting. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on October 4, 2022, the committee is resuming its study on the impacts of climate change. I would like to welcome our panel of witnesses. Representing CBCL Limited, we have Vincent Lees, Senior Coastal Engineer. Representing the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation, we have Catherine Bakos, Director, Climate Finance and Science, and Joanna Ekwum, ACAM, okay, Managing Director, Climate Resilient Infrastructure. Representing Oceans North, Susanna Fuller, Vice President, Operations and Projects, and representing the Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association, we have Mr. Michael Barron, President. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. You will each have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, and I will begin with Mr. Lees, please, for 5 minutes or less.
Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Lees. I work as a Senior Coastal Engineer with Halifax-based consulting firm CBCL. I've spent more than 20 years studying coastal processes and designing coastal infrastructure, and my main geographical area of practice is the east coast of Canada, with a focus on federal infrastructure such as ports, ferry terminals, and national parks, and a special emphasis on small craft harbors managed by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, of which there are several hundred. Small craft harbors are the backbone of many coastal communities around the region, and these harbors sit on the front lines of storm and climate change impacts. Many of them were hit particularly hard by Hurricane Fiona. Since the end of September, I've been busy working on the implications of Hurricane Fiona from the standpoint of coastal processes, storm impacts, as well as infrastructure maintenance, repair, and engineering design. The force of the storm was well documented as possibly the strongest tropical storm to hit Canada, as gauged by the historic low pressure. The intensity of the storm in terms of storm surge level and wave action is unprecedented for the hardest hit areas, which explains the historic level of damage. That is notably the case along the entire north shore of Prince Edward Island, as well as areas of Cape Breton, north shore of Nova Scotia, southwest Newfoundland, and the Magdalen Islands. Tide gauges along the north shore of Prince Edward Island measured the storm surge peak at 2 meters above the normal astronomical high tide for the day, 2 meters. The entire north shore of PEI and its infrastructure was underwater. Wharves, beaches, cottages, coastal roads. The deck of the fishing wharf at Red Head, PEI, had been at least 2.5 feet underwater before the storm knocked out the tide gauge instrument out of the service. The entire wharf was destroyed, and this is one example of many. The extreme storm surge allowed waves to hit communities inland where they would otherwise be protected inside coastal bays. Along sections of southwest Newfoundland, some communities were in the direct axis of huge Atlantic waves, causing unprecedented impacts to people and property. For engineering purposes, the unprecedented storm surge has required us to revisit design parameters that were based on historical observations. For areas along the north shore of Prince Edward Island, we had to significantly increase the recommended design elevations for coastal infrastructure to account for this storm now being part of the data set. This is in addition to the projected increase in mean sea level from climate change, which will worsen the impacts of such storms on coastal communities. Now, quantifying impacts of climate change on the actual frequency and intensity of hurricanes themselves is an area of active scientific research. Climate change projections indicate an increase in air and water temperature, including later in the season. These conditions will increasingly favor the development of large Atlantic hurricanes, as well as their sustained intensity over Atlantic Canada. In addition, sea level rise will allow storm surges and waves to impact infrastructure further inland. Therefore, while quantification of rising storm frequency and intensity remains challenging, climate resiliency is increasingly important for coastal infrastructure. In recent years, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans has been conducting structural condition assessments on its small craft harbor infrastructure for the purposes of asset management. These assessments are meant to produce rankings of infrastructure condition from poor to good condition. This greatly helps prioritize immediate and long-term spending. DFO personnel assessing storm damage have communicated to me that the hardest hit harbors were those that scored lowest on the asset condition studies. In other words, older and deteriorated infrastructure suffered the most damage, which is not a surprising result. Therefore, Hurricane Fiona reinforces the necessity for asset condition assessment, continuous monitoring followed by timely maintenance and replacement of infrastructure at the end of its life cycle. These elements are a critical part of keeping climate resilient infrastructure for the benefits of the local communities. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to the Centre on Climate Adaptation. I don't know if you're giving one statement or if you're sharing it, but you have 5 minutes between you when you're ready.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As a geoscientist watching Hurricane Fiona, I couldn't escape a feeling of inevitability seeing the impacts of coastal areas of Atlantic Canada. Changing flood and erosion impacts on Canada's east coast were recently documented in the publication Rising Seas and Shifting Sands, supported by the Standards Council of Canada and the National Research Council, bringing together 60 subject matter experts across the country. The risks outlined include, as Vincent mentioned, coastal storm surge, often with high wind and heavy rainfall, as well as changing sea ice conditions, relative sea level rise, and coastal erosion. The urgent challenge is to adapt to these more extreme and changing conditions. I was encouraged by Friday's testimony from ministers, particularly the strong message from several parties that climate change is real. There was also discussion of moving people and infrastructure out of harm's way, which echoed comments made in October by Minister Guilbeault of Environment and Climate Change Canada. There are 4 key approaches to coastal adaptation. Our focus has historically been protection, for which we can use both natural and grey infrastructure solutions. We can also use avoidance by preventing development in areas of high risk. We can also look at retreat, pulling back infrastructure from areas, including homes, as referenced by Minister Bragg last Friday. We can also accommodate the risk, that is to live better with them. For example, even if areas are flooded, they are not significantly damaged. Selecting an approach requires us to understand the natural system so that we can work with rather than against natural processes where possible. In some cases, existing infrastructure like wharves or seawalls are actually exacerbating climate change impacts, for example, by stopping sediment moving along the coast or moving inland as sea levels rise. Other infrastructure, including housing, is in areas of high risk where it does not necessarily make socioeconomic sense to rebuild or defend. In short, we need investment in coastal management that weighs long-term costs and benefits, as we discussed with Infrastructure Canada whilst developing input to the National Adaptation Strategy. There is specific opportunity to combine natural and grey infrastructure solutions to reduce risk while we're delivering multiple benefits and improving people's lives in our coastal communities. Recovery is not just about building back quickly or building back higher or bigger. We need to build back better to maximize the return on our investment in social, natural, and in economic terms.
So building on what Joanna said, what are the financial consequences of the status quo? The Intact Centre has identified ways to mitigate the physical risks of climate change across specific industry sectors and the financial impacts those risks pose. As an example, the Intact Centre conducted the study Treading Water: Impact of Catastrophic Flooding on Canada's Housing Market to determine if community-level flooding affects Canadian residential real estate and mortgage markets. A key finding of the report showed that flooding caused a direct impact on an average 8.2% reduction on the sold price of homes, solidifying the material financial impact to the Canadian housing market, a market that is already underinsured due to flooding. So currently 10% of homes are uninsurable in Canada relative to basement flooding. So there needs to be a strong recommendations to help homeowners help themselves, which then helps local communities and national economies at large. To do this, flood risk needs to be transparent and information needs to be made available for people to make their own decisions to protect themselves from all levels of flooding. On top of the recommendations that Joanna has offered, we recommend the following actions. 1, municipalities should distribute the 3 steps to cost-effective home flood protection infographic to homeowners on a means to lower the risk of basement flooding. So I've printed off a few of these infographics. If you would like them, I'm happy to share. This guidance was first launched in the town of Antigonish and in Antigonish County in Nova Scotia about 2 years ago. Since then, towns across Canada have been including this infographic in property tax assessment mailouts. 2, the federal government should link the Climate Adaptation Home Rating Program to the EnerGuide Home Energy Audits Program. 3, the federal government should update the flood risk maps and ensure they're publicly accessible. 4, the federal government should develop a flood risk scoring system based on postal code. By mobilizing action, this would be a material contribution to retain the equity within Canadian homes and support all levels of the Canadian economy.
We'll now go to Ms. Fuller for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here today. I think you've heard a fair amount from Oceans North staff on a few topics lately, so my introduction will be brief. We are a Canadian oceans-focused charity that works to achieve healthy oceans that support vibrant communities. We work closely with Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities throughout Inuit Nunangat and Atlantic Canada. We also engage on international oceans issues where relevant. And we attended COP26 as part of the Canadian delegation to try and raise ocean issues in the context of climate change. Over the last several years, we've significantly increased our engagement on ocean and climate with a focus on emissions reductions in marine industries, shipping, ports, and fishing vessels, and assessing the readiness of DFO to manage fisheries in a changing climate. In 2021, we released a review of fisheries management practices and policies where there's a clear gap in proactive incorporation of climate change. We have since published 3 peer-reviewed papers on fisheries and climate change together with academic partners. Things are changing when it comes to incorporating climate change, as just this week, the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas adopted a forward-looking climate change resolution. Because of our growing work on the climate and ocean space, we've engaged in consultations and provided advice on aspects of Canada's climate policies, from the emissions reduction plan to the national adaptation strategy and the as yet to be released blue economy strategy. We noted that in budget 2021, fisheries were not included in sections of the budget relating to industry and climate. We've also commented on the fact that a blue economy strategy for Canada must connect to our net zero ambitions and address coastal infrastructure. So I recognize that you've called us here today to speak specifically to Hurricane Fiona effects on fish harvesters, fisheries infrastructure, and the role of climate crisis on storm severity. And I think the witnesses you've just heard from, as well as those you heard from in the previous session, gave some very specific recommendations on how to deal with that. And many of us with offices in Halifax and Newfoundland and Cape Breton, many of us felt very directly the impacts of Hurricane Fiona. However, it's our view that the impacts of the hurricane and perhaps our overall lack of readiness is a symptom of a larger problem in Canada, where our coasts and oceans are often either left out of climate plans or climate impacts are left out of ocean strategies. We have been duly warned well in advance by scientists, by the comprehensive IPCC report in 2019 on oceans in the cryosphere, by the reports that you've already heard of here today, and by communities who are seeing the changes on an annual basis. Climate change is and will impact our coastal communities and industries into the future, and even more rapidly than we've experiencing to date. So I'd like to just leave you with 3 overarching recommendations, and you have heard from the other witnesses on the need to really look at our small craft harbors. In 2018, DFO did complete a study on the vulnerability of small craft harbors to climate change. This report needs updating with new data, and then that needs to be linked directly into infrastructure upgrades and funding to assist the most vulnerable ports in Canada, many of which are in Atlantic Canada, to adapt and in some cases retreat where impacts of climate change are not manageable over the long term. The National Adaptation Strategy is fairly comprehensive. However, I know that I worked very hard to make sure that oceans and coasts and fishing industry were included in that. And I think more work could be done to ensure that, that our adaptation strategy really does speak to the impacts on our coasts and also works with the provinces on that. The second recommendation is that Canada needs an overarching oceans and climate strategy. We need to be proactive rather than reactive to the changes coming to our coasts and oceans that are only slated to increase in speed rather than decrease. The coastal communities are increasingly vulnerable to storms and sea level rise. It's imperative that Canada develop a forward-looking, comprehensive strategy to adapt to and mitigate climate impacts, including nature-based solutions. Other jurisdictions are undertaking such work, including the US. This strategy should include predictions on what and where we might expect to have coastal fisheries into the future, given how much of our socioeconomic well-being is reliant on fisheries in Atlantic Canada in particular. And provinces should be invited to join such a strategy and implement or develop coastal protection plans. Finally, and this is again more of a 1,000-foot view on this issue, but we've noticed that the fishing industry, while maybe feeling the impacts of increased storms and intensity, are often not included in efforts to reduce emissions and to transition to net zero. Fuel costs are increasingly prohibitive, yet there are few incentives for fishers and boat builders to shift to low emission designs and engines. We have not started to switch our small craft harbors to electrification and to more sustainable renewable energy sources. So in this line, more work needs to be done to shift our shipping to low emissions and electrify our ports. I will leave it at that and be open to any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Barron for 5 minutes or less, please.
Good afternoon, honourable members of Parliament. It is an honour to be here today to present the impacts of climate change and to discuss the effects Fiona had on some areas where my membership resides. My name is Michael Barron. I'm the President of the Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association and a board member of the Canadian Independent Fish Harvesters Federation and the United Fisheries Conservation Alliance, UFCA. Also, I am an independent owner and operator who fishes lobster, halibut, and snow crab from a small coastal community in Ingonish in northern Cape Breton. Fiona arrived on September 24th and hit Nova Scotia as the lowest pressure recorded storm in Canadian history at 932 millibars. For comparison, in 2019, Dorian was 958 millibars and Hurricane Juan in 2003 was 973 millibars. Once Fiona hit Nova Scotia waters, the pressure difference could have caused warmer than average water temperatures, which would help fuel intensity. Historically, in September, the Gulf Stream tends to bring slightly more relaxed waters to the Maritimes. However, that was not the case this past September, as the jet stream seemed to carry warm water from the tropics further up the Atlantic coast than average for the time of year, which could definitely be a result of climate change. Fiona created a considerable amount of damage for the short time she graced Cape Breton with her appearance. As a result, some of our members from Gabarouse to Bay St. Lawrence experienced significant damage. Some fishermen lost wharfs with traps that were stored for the season, along with roads that were leading to wharfs that were washed out entirely, and an extensive amount of sand washed into one harbor, allowing this to be unknown if the vessels could actually utilize this harbor. These harbors have been divested for several years and have left many unanswered questions, and slow reactions to clear, concise relief opportunities. In some other ports, boats that could not get hauled out of the water also suffered some damage. The community of Ingonish, where I reside and fish out of, also received considerable amount of wharf damage, and this wharf had been scheduled to have been repaired for several years, but kept getting put off. The barrier wall, which protects the harbor in the southern part of my town, has had a void in it for the last 5 years, and it has quadrupled in size since. It is to the point now where the ocean flows through the opening every high tide. This void allowed an 8-foot tide surge to cover the only southbound road in and out of our town and reach people's homes to cause them to evacuate along that shoreline. Further north, the only fish plant received a considerable amount of damage, which I'm sure you have all seen throughout the media. A road and a bridge were washed out entirely on September 24th and was not replaced until November 8th. Storms of this magnitude have been known to have a lingering effect on fish's behavioral patterns. After Dorian blew through in 2019, the ocean was a desert for almost 2 months. As a result, the groundfish longline fleet had many unsuccessful halibut trips. And in the fishing industry, there is always uncertainty and never a guarantee to make a paycheck when you cut your lines clear to go fishing. Since Fiona, the same has happened. The fleet has been left wondering when things will return to normal. The pressure drop seems to have a dramatic effect on the migration pattern of the halibut. Not just halibut, lobster fishermen in the fall and winter districts can attest to different behavioral patterns. With high operating costs this season, it is leaving many longline boats tied to the wharf, causing there to be a less high-quality protein available. Fiona only added to the deteriorating coastline off Cape Breton. Year after year, post-tropical storms and violent northeast winter storms have left many coastal communities waiting for an unrecoverable event, which all seem to be stemming from climate change. But unfortunately, given the recent destruction caused by Fiona, the writing is on our shorelines and in our waters. Climate change is here, and it is time to build the infrastructure needed to protect the pristine coastlines known worldwide for their vistas and beauty. It is time for our political parties to work with small crafts and harbors to help protect our coastal communities that rely on these aging, failing infrastructures. It is time to build them bigger and better, and it is wiser to deal with the many changes from both climate and changing industry. Thank you to the committee for studying the impact on Fiona of climate change on Atlantic Canada and eastern Quebec, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to the round of questions, I of course want to welcome Mr. Backrack, who is filling in for his colleague, Ms. Barron. We will go to Mr. Small first for 6 minutes or less, but I would ask the members of the committee to please identify who you're asking your question to and not leave it just hanging for anybody to answer, because it'll be you'll be losing some of your time just sat there looking to see who's going to answer. So Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses who've shown up in person, especially here today, and for those who have joined online to help us out in our very important study. My first question to Mr. Barron, I heard you mentioned some divested harbours and wharfs that were damaged. How much of an issue is that going to be for your fleet in the coming season?
Thank you very much for the question. So I can give you one example. One harbor, it's a small harbor. There's 5 wharfs that were all lost to Fiona that had their traps stored on it. And it's in a unique situation because it is divested and it doesn't fall under the federal small crafts and harbors. But where it's on private property, and some of these people did not own the property, so it's not deeded nor insured, so they're falling to the wayside. There's no provincial help and there's no federal help at this point.
So how many harbors, how many harvesters in that port, for example, would have relied on those divested properties or assets that now they're not going to be able to count on federal funding to fix them?
Well, like I mentioned, it's a small harbor. It's only 5, but so 15 people in that town. There's probably only approximately 45 people that reside there. So fishing is the only thing in that little community. So
how widespread of an issue is this in all the affected areas, PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, Labrador, do you think, these type wharfs?
I think it's very widespread. I mean, I know within in Newfoundland, I mean, I know you have the same issue with some divested harbors and stuff, so you'll be facing the same thing. And I believe both the provincial government and the federal government's working very close to make sure they get the funding allocated necessary to get these repairs done. Unfortunately, it's taking too much time, and given the fact that we live in so far north, like winter is setting in, so time is of the essence to get this work completed.
So how much contact has your organization had with small craft harbors so far, and how would you describe the progress at this stage?
The small craft and harbor, I can't answer that because I haven't had the direct contact with them. My staff has had, so I will get you that answer in writing.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a couple of questions for Mr. Lays. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
3 minutes and 18 seconds.
Thousands. Mr. Lays, have any contracts been signed by firms like yours to design wharfs that need to be rebuilt for the spring?
Yes, so there's a number of projects that are ongoing right now that have actually started before Hurricane Fiona, and for which we have redesigned wharf elevations and coastal protection and the like to incorporate Fiona. So it's part of the ongoing amount of work that we do for these harbors. So there's always work on the go, and I'm sure that people who work directly for the small craft harbors would have a number of projects that they can handle in-house to do the repairs as well. So I don't have a full picture as part of a private consulting firm, but I can tell you there's many such projects going on.
No, what I meant was, I don't know if I was clear with my questioning, was has any new work begun since Fiona on the damages or repair of the damages or replacing wharfs that were destroyed? Has any new work begun? I don't mean the contracts that were in place before Fiona.
Yeah.
Just checking on how the progress is going here on this path towards rebuilding.
Yeah, so we have some projects that are direct rebuilding of some fish plants, for example, and properties have lost shoreline. But in terms of the overall picture from Small Craft Harbor, I would defer that question to someone working directly at the Small Craft Harbor headquarters in Moncton.
Okay, so from the time your firm receives a contract to design a wharf, how long does it take to commission a wharf such as the one you mentioned at PEI that was destroyed?
For construction?
From the time you sign a contract to design it to the time the wharf's commissioned for use, how long?
So the design can be a couple months depending on what available data there is. And then there's a time to tender and construction. So I'd say a year is probably a typical timeline, but it could be more or less depending on the amount of data and complexity that's needed.
Okay, so on Friday we heard that small craft harbors need to be ready by April 1st at the latest. Based on your expertise, how many of the badly damaged or destroyed wharfs will be rebuilt or repaired by then? And if we can't get there, what's the solution for harvesters, because they're going to be in quite the predicament?
Right, well, that's a good question. I would doubt that all of the wharfs can be fully rebuilt by then, but certainly it depends on the amount of damage. So for some wharves, it can be only a portion of the wharf that was damaged or destroyed, and in this case, it's easier to build in to fast track the repair there. But for areas where it's the entire wharf, I doubt that the replacement structure can be in place for the start of the new fishing season.
Thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Kellaway for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see the witnesses here in person, and of course, Mr. Lees on Zoom. My first question is to Mr. Barron. We heard in the last meeting from all Atlantic fisheries ministers that climate change is real, it's here, and we need to do something about it in the context of coastal infrastructure. We also heard that we need to work together. And Mr. Barron, you highlighted that really, really well. So I want to unpack a couple of things here. I want to talk about when we say the words, we need to develop climate resilient small craft harbors. Can you paint a picture of what that means to you as a harvester, for us here and those watching?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. So when we talk about building bigger and better and what we need to do, like certain instances, some harbors have been years without being dredged. So as long as these storms keep coming, those harbors are going to keep filling in. Those entrances are going to fill in. Passage in and out of the harbor, which is a safe refuge, will be deemed impassable. So dredging projects have to happen. Breakwaters, that have suffered through all these storms, losing some of the armor stone, has to be built bigger, has to be built better. Right? The wharf structures, pilings have to be changed. All this aging stuff that's been taking the back seat, all that stuff has to be repaired, right? So, like, dredging projects are of the essence, right? PEI is a perfect example. A lot of those harbors are probably going to have dredging projects completed before the spring fishery. Is the time there? Is the resources there?
Thanks for that, Mr. Barron. I want to provide Mr. Lees an opportunity as well, because I wanted to hear from the practitioner in the field or on the water, but now I want to hear from the coastal engineer. In terms of climate resilient small craft harbors, unpack what that means to us, and what do you deem as priorities number 1, 2, and 3?
So climate resilience can mean many things depending on what the coastal processes are at play there. If you're talking about a harbor that's, say, on an Atlantic shoreline with a rocky coast, that means high wharves and good breakwaters for wave protection. If you're talking about a small craft harbor on the North Shore PEI, climate resilient can mean some sort of established scheme to divert the sediment away from the entrance and make sure that you have available dredge contractors on standby in case they need to intervene. In all cases, climate resilient means reinforced infrastructure to be able to take an increase in elevation because the flood frequency is increasing with these storms.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just want to check with the chair. How much time do I have?
2 minutes, 50 seconds.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Lees, but I wanted to stay with you on a couple of items. But so the current government since 2016 has invested nearly $1 billion. The government previous to that, Conservative government, less. But it sounds like that despite these really important investments, obviously there's more to be done to ensure that our harbors are ready now and into the future. I want to get a sense of the cost. I know that this may be an unfair question, but in terms of, if you looked at the small craft harbor wharfs in Atlantic Canada, and to the best of your ability, what's the ballpark we're looking at to get harbors climate resilient, the infrastructure that you talked about that needs to be bolstered to withstand Fiona and other type of storms that are literally on the horizon?
Right. So that can be a complicated math question, and the numbers can balloon pretty quickly. But if you estimate that, so there are several hundred small craft harbors around Atlantic Canada. I think the ballpark number is around 800, with a lot of them in Newfoundland, number 1, and then PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. So let's say ballpark 800. A new wharf can be order of magnitude 1 million or more. So for an entire small craft harbor, you're talking certainly several $1 million if you're talking new infrastructure. So if you multiply that by the number of harbors around, that's certainly a huge number. And so the key is to prioritize. So as you said correctly, there's been a lot of recent investment in it, which has been extremely useful. As mentioned in the priority list and asset management, those harbors that were with more recent structures fared the best in terms of climate resiliency in the face of Hurricane Fiona. So it's really about taking the harbors that have extensive use where the structures are deteriorated, and these would be the priority. Now, in terms of a total number for investment, I would defer that question to someone from the Small Crafts Harbors Department because they would have a better picture on the total numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway. You're down to about 18 seconds, so I don't think you'll get the question out, let alone an answer. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take this opportunity to greet many fisheries associations who are on the Hill this week because of the Artisan Fishers Week and fisheries workers, and we're happy to have them with us on the Hill. Talking to them at lunchtime today, Of course, they have evoked major concerns about the fallout of the closure of certain fisheries, of climate change, of the effect of Fiona at the Madeline Islands for Quebec. But in Quebec, there's the St. Lawrence River, and there are wharves that are underwater. I'm thinking of Place Royale in Quebec. All our wharves and our ferries at Île aux Coudres, we have to dredge every year, and I'm a witness, first-line witness to that. So my question is for Ms. Aikem and Mrs. Bakopanos. I don't know if I've pronounced your names properly, I'm sorry. I was very interested in your approach regarding natural elements, because there was rock formation in the St. Lawrence because of the erosion of the shores, same thing in the Madeline Islands. And this creates concerns, of course, about the techniques to be used for putting up rock, because the river empties the sediment under the rocks. So often it's not a good way of doing things, but it's the method that's used very quickly without asking too many questions. When you talked about using natural elements, I'd like to have a concrete approach compared to the traditional use. Yes. Thank you for your question. I think what we're proposing in Canada, that seems to be the normal default solution. But in other countries, such as the UK, where I'm from, and I've worked in the Netherlands as well, and many different approaches were used that work with the ecosystem. In Percé, in Quebec, for instance, there was a project to enhance the beach, to work with the natural processes. The problem with these building up rocks is that there's the transportation of sediment, because the erosion is a natural process. So that sediment is not transported, and there's no cost to putting it on beaches. So when you have gray infrastructure, you have to know what the ideal system is and how it will change, because it's like a cell. And our gray infrastructure does change the natural ecosystem. So it's a good thing to figure out what we're doing here. Now, with regard to the infrastructure, we're talking about rebuilding infrastructure that's obsolete, and the ones that were hardest hit were already obsolete. So when we think about looking at that infrastructure, is replacement an important factor? Because if erosion or the attack of climate change is done on a specific region, should we call into question the place of these infrastructures? Yes, exactly, because we've changed paradigms in the way of looking at this. We look at the natural system more when we have original concepts and original designs. I think that's something that has to be looked at when infrastructure is broken down. We have to know if it's in the right place. Should it be in a better place? Just because it was there, maybe it causes more erosion a little further on the shore. I've seen examples of jetties that affect sediment and causes erosion of dunes and beaches further along. So follow the natural tendency to establish infrastructure wherever nature is guiding it, is what you're saying. Very interesting. Do I have any time left, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Barron, I know you're also representing people from the Madeline Islands. What's urgent in the Madeline Islands right now? Is it Cap-au-Meul Wharf? Is it various needs of fishers because there was a lot of financial and other losses? What's the urgency? What are the priorities in your opinion?
I don't represent anybody from the Madeline Islands. I represent them through the Federation, like through other things we do with the Federation, but I don't represent them on their on this type of situation. But I mean, they're faced with the same situation we are right now, because I mean, like
Ouais.
like the photos that I've seen from some of the fishermen over there, the sand dunes and stuff that filled in. So they need some major dredging and infrastructure there as well. So that's just from what I've seen. I can't speak to it with 100% certainty.
Quelle serait
And what would be the priority for your members? Is it repairing old wharves, building new ones, raising the security barriers?
All of those need to happen.
Tout ça,
Because there's some wharfs that fishermen are using that aren't divested, that are federally protected, that are not receiving any work because there's not enough vessels at that harbor. And what seems to happen with small crafts and harbors, if it is a harbor that's not as busy, it goes lower down the priority chain. And so when the funding is allocated, the bigger harbors are always getting it, and the smaller ones are left with scraps.
Thank you, Madam Debienne. We'll now go to Mr. Backrack, and I can guarantee there's no pressure on him. I'm sure Lisa Marie will grade you afterwards and let you know how you made out. So for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the committee for allowing me to sub in the place of my colleague and participate in this interesting discussion. I have promised I'll behave myself, and we'll let Ms. Barron be the judge. I wanted to start my questions with one to Ms. Fuller. Most of this conversation has focused on adaptation to the impacts of climate change we know are coming and in many ways are already here. You spoke in your presentation about the importance of mitigation. These two concepts are very different ones in some ways, especially when it comes to the time frame over which they need to take place. How do we ensure that the conversation about mitigation doesn't get lost as we deal with the very immediate imperative for adaptation, things like dredging, rebuilding wharves, that kind of thing? How do we ensure that the long-term need for us to drive down emissions and mitigate the worst impacts of climate change doesn't get lost in the conversation?
I think that is going to be, that it has been the challenge and will continue to be the challenge, and we will have to keep being able to react to emergencies that are going to increase in frequency and intensity. At the same time, I mentioned some of the work that we've been doing in the fishing industry, and when I read Budget 2021, for example, there was quite a bit in there about the agricultural industry and helping agricultural shift to lower emissions and to adapt to climate change, but absolutely nothing in there in the fishing industry. And I think fishermen, like Michael Barron and those that I grew up with in Cape Breton, have really been left out of the conversations, whether it is on adaptation or mitigation. We haven't included people who rely on the ocean in a lot of these conversations and in our policy discussions. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to do that. We'll have to prioritize both at the same time if that is possible, but Canada is doing quite a bit on its emissions reduction plan. I don't see the fishing industry included in there right now. I know there are some efforts to build some lower emissions lobster vessels, and Oceans North is really pleased to be part of that, and we'll be launching an initiative in the next couple of weeks. But I think that we have to include the people who are most impacted in being part of the solution. And I would just encourage, the Canadian government to do that in all ways that they possibly can.
Thank you, Ms. Fuller. Perhaps turning now to Mr. Barron, and on the same theme, you mentioned that the impacts of climate change are very much here. I'm curious what you've observed in your conversations with fishermen when it comes to their perceptions of the issue and their openness to technological changes or changes in practices that drive down emissions and start to deal with the actual source of the problem. I can imagine that it would be hard if you're out there in a boat to connect, maybe switching to an electric motor to this huge global challenge of climate change and the impact that it's having. Do you see people's thinking shifting in that way?
Not so much a complete shift. I mean, the discussion has been had, and I mean, I sat in on a presentation on hybrid engines and stuff, but one thing I'd like for you to know is that wild captured fish is one of the lowest carbon protein sources, right? And so wild fisheries, for example, is 1 to 5 kilograms of carbon per kilogram of fish caught, as where red meat production is 50 to 750 kilograms of carbon, right? So, I mean, that's one thing that has to be discussed here too, right? And you have to understand. And the one thing, when you mention these hybrid engines, you have to understand, like, when we're out in the elements, the one thing with running a diesel engine, we're guaranteed to get home.
Yeah.
Right? And when we have to rely on like potential solar power and stuff where it's still so new, it leaves industry still with a lot of questions.
Right.
And we're open to have the discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Barron. Another minute and a half. Okay. I'm interested in asking Mr. Lees, you mentioned that these coastal storms have forced engineers to revisit the design parameters for infrastructure and move away from a reliance on historic parameters towards relying on projections of future change. Could you talk a little bit about how that process takes place and on what future predictions engineers are now basing the design parameters? Are there standards for sizing infrastructure or designing infrastructure?
So there are no standards in terms of a definite guidebook for now, but certainly the official projections from the IPCC are what we use for, first of all, for sea level rise. So depending on the emissions scenarios, you get different rates of sea level rise anywhere from today to into the next century. So we use that. And then, so we use that for flood and inundation levels. And we use that to also put as input conditions for wave modeling. For example, when we look at wave forces, the amount of wave energy that hits a structure will depend on the water depth. So you can imagine as sea levels are rising, that will allow bigger waves to come closer to shore. So we do use that. The more tricky thing is about the developing these changes in storm intensity that I was mentioning. There is no clear consensus yet as to what to use in terms of increasing hurricane intensity and or frequency. So it's an area of evolving science. And so what we use in terms of storm surge statistics would be the past because that's what we have. So when I mentioned that the calculations have to be updated, is that with a storm with Fiona, the data point now lies outside the range of what has been historically observed. So all of a sudden, your extreme 1% probability storm gets higher because Hurricane Fiona is now part of the statistics. And so it's an evolving practice.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Backrack. You've lived up to Ms. Barron's expectations of extra time as well. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again, witnesses, today. I'd like to just follow up on, as a start, Mr. Lees, on something you said. So you said costing around $1 million to Mr. Kellaway's questions in terms of wharf repair or wharf replacement. I have a lot. I'm South Shore in Nova Scotia, so as you know, going from Prospect all the way down to the tip of Shelburne County, I have a lot of small craft harbors, probably the most in the country, and just as many devolved wharfs that used to be small craft harbors. And in Port Mouton, for example, recently DFO did a rebuilding of the breakwall, and that alone, just on the breakwall, cost $5 million, and it's already being breached because they didn't build it high enough on one corner. In Lunenburg, which everybody knows Lunenburg has one public wharf, which is a small craft harbor. It's a historic wharf. It's existed for about 140 years. It's called the Railway Wharf. The engineering estimates come in to replace it, and it's not a very big wharf, at $15 million just to replace that wharf. So DFO estimated, and I haven't seen an update, that Hurricane Fiona, in the path of Hurricane Fiona, damaged 100 small craft harbor wharfs with some operational problem and demolished over 20 wharfs. And that's just the small craft harbor wharfs, does not include the ones that DFO has devolved to communities. So I'm having a hard time seeing how the government's $100 million for Hurricane Fiona wharf relief. They've increased in the economic statement Fiona relief to $1 billion. What the economic statement doesn't allocate any more than $100 million. When I look at those numbers, just the repair to the 100 wharfs alone is going to be about $500 million. That's if you can find the engineering help and construction help like you, like your company provides. So are you sure that when we have to complete the north shore of PEI, the wharfs are all demolished, that it's only going to cost $1 million or $2 million for those wharfs, when in my own riding it's costing $15 million for a wharf?
Yeah, so apologies for that. The 1 million figure was an order of magnitude in terms of starting point. So typically you can't get much done for less than the million, but so in order of magnitude sense, is it 1 million, 10 million, or 100 million per harbor? I was saying it's starting point 1 million per structure, but of course, if the structure is substantial, it could be 10 million, right? So I just, sorry about that, and
That's
you
okay.
are correct to clarify that.
So can I ask you another question that's been bugging me, and I've had chats with lots of members about it. In terms of building back stronger wharfs, which we have an opportunity to do here because we've got an unusual amount of money that we didn't have before to deal with small craft harbors, are we going to build them back? Are the engineering firms going to build back wharfs the same way with the same old 100-plus, 150-year-old plus technology of treated wooden wharfs? In British Columbia, they're building them with steel tubes on floating concrete wharfs, and they have large vessels on them. They seem much sturdier. I don't understand why in Atlantic Canada we're still building wharfs the way we did 140 years ago.
So cost would be part of the answer to that. You have a certain budget to allocate to the entire area of small craft harbors, and steel tends to be, of course, on the more expensive end of things. So that would be...
Keep replacing them because of storms, it's probably going to be cheaper, but that's just a wild guess. Thank you very much, though, for those answers. Mr. Barron, you talked about the harbors that don't have that aren't small craft harbors that have had damage, and I think there are a lot of them beyond the ones that the Minister and the Department of Fisheries is focusing on in terms of small craft harbors. Those used to be small craft harbors and were usually devolved to a community group or a not-for-profit group to manage, who hasn't had the capital to keep them up to speed or the ability to charge enough wharfage fees to do and maintain them as effectively as possible. Do you think DFO or COA, or this special programs out of COA, should go to those harbors as well?
Yes, thank you for the question. I definitely think the programs, especially from ACOA, should go to harbors like that. And it's actually one avenue we are looking at for our membership is to help them through ACOA. And I think that may be the perfect route for them to go. And I hope that the federal government will help move it in the direction to ACOA to make sure these people receive assistance.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We'll now go to Mr. Hanley for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, and thank you very much to all the witnesses for appearing. And first, I think I'll continue the cost discussion for now. And Ms. Backos, I know Intact Centre has done some work over the years on the costs of climate change and infrastructure, and you, I think, Ms. Aiken, referred to insurance costs and the effect on that on the housing market. But do you have estimates on the insurance costs accrued from Fiona so far?
Not specifically for Fiona, but if we look at the insurable catastrophic loss claims for Canada, we can look between 1983 to 2008. Losses ranged from approximately $250 to $450 million. From 2009 onward to 2021, losses averaged $1.96 billion. Now, that's insurable losses. If you multiply that amount by 3 to 4 times, and if you take into consideration the BC floods and mudslides and what happened in Fiona, it's actually 5 to 6 times that amount is uninsurable losses. So that's money coming out of budgets for hospitals, schools, infrastructure development. So that's coming out of government budgets.
I'm glad you covered that because that was part of my follow-up question was on the uninsurable costs. So if you can comment on, say, the costs of infrastructure investments, and I might add the $100 million so far promised is a start in what the federal government is committing to, but regardless, we can see that we may need to go a lot further than that. But if you compare the costs of infrastructure investments in the first place, like solid infrastructure investments looking to the future, compared to the recurring costs of destruction, including insured, loss of income, loss of economic opportunities, lost homes, insurance costs, uninsurable costs, is there any comparator there?
So I'll flip it to my colleague Joanna as well, but I will say that in a cost avoidance perspective, for every dollar spent in adaptation and protecting communities against risk of loss, you actually end up saving on average $3 to $8 over a 10-year period in the long term, and that's a low estimate. It could be as high as $15 to $62, some research has shown, and some research has even shown $250. But again, that's in cost avoidance and over a 10-year period. But Joanna, if you have anything else to add?
I would just maybe add that often we're focused on kind of reducing risks, but there's also an opportunity through adaptation to make things better. And I would refer to the Percé, Ville de Percé example. The cost-benefit of that project was actually 68 to 1, according to the cost-benefit analysis, due to the increase in tourism industry because it was linked to revitalization of the promenade as well. So there's actually opportunity in adaptation to make things better, not just to kind of contain risk.
Yeah, remarkable return on investment then if we look at the next 50 to 100 years. Mr. Lees, briefly, you talk about the fact that in Fiona, the recently renovated or rebuilt harbors did the best, or wharves did the best, I think. Is it? Could you tell me the features, the specific features? Was it the very newness, or was it the height of the wharves, or what were the features that really were related to resiliency?
So every case can be slightly different, but my guess would be that it's mostly in terms of the structural strength of the wharf. So for the deteriorated infrastructure, you'd have old timber and deteriorated concrete and the like, which would be a lot more prone to wave action. Whereas for new construction, you might have steel members or brand new concrete that resists a lot better to waves and flooding. So it's not necessarily the height, but it's the structural strength. Where the height comes into play is with respect to damage on infrastructure that's on top of the wharf, like your fishing, your bait sheds, and your traps, and the electrical systems and the like.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Ms. Fuller, very briefly, a kind of an existential question. As we move towards, climate resistance, better infrastructure, do you see a future where, with sufficient investment, engagement with the fishers, that we can have a thriving fishing industry alongside safe and protected and resistant harbors?
I do, absolutely. I think one of the key things we need to look at is the climate vulnerability of major species, because we are seeing species shifts where they're occurring, and often people fish the species that are not too far from their wharf and from their home. So I think we need to look at where species are moving, and then where we expect in 20, 30, 40, 50 years those species to actually be. We already know that the Gulf of Maine is warming very quickly. There's no more lobster fisheries in some parts of the United States. Those things are moving. That's a species that is moving further north. So I think we need to look at that shifting of species so that we can adequately plan for fisheries of the future.
Thank you for that, Mr. Henley. We'll now go to Madam Debienne for 2.5 minutes, please, or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish to thank our witnesses. Really, you're extremely relevant, and I thank you for being there. I'd like to go to Ms. Fuller again, because I need to know something. You said earlier that fishers are being neglected, their expertise and their knowledge on the ground. That's exactly what I heard at lunchtime when I met with fishermen. I took advantage of their knowledge of this environment and their will to protect the fishery. So that leads me to ask you, what is DFO not doing to open a better discussion and get the information needed from fishermen? How can they improve their communications?
My French is okay, but I will respond in English. I think what needs to probably happen is real, community by community discussions on what fishermen are seeing in terms of climate change and how they see themselves adapting and also what they need to adapt. Those aren't really happening. In the National Adaptation Strategy, the fishing industry wasn't really included until the very end. I don't think that was on purpose. I just think that dealing with climate adaptation is a giant task. But I do think, for our coastal provinces, we really need to speak to the people on the water, what they're seeing and over what time frame, and start to adjust using that knowledge. That being said, I know fishermen are very busy and have a lot of things to do on top of just going fishing, which is just a huge job. So I would look to organizations like the Federation of Independent Fish Harvesters to ask how those consultations and how that outreach can be done most effectively. But I do think it needs to start being done on an annual basis, because otherwise we are going to be faced with these constant changes, just reacting to change as opposed to being proactive. And I'd be interested anyway. Yeah, so I think the Independent Fish Harvesters Federation would be a good place to start in trying to engage fishers more in the conversation.
Thank you, Madam Debian. There's only about 13 seconds left. Hardly time to get your question in, let alone an answer. Now go to Mr. Backrack for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Continuing with Ms. Fuller, you spoke about some of the ecological changes that we're seeing and will continue to see, and we've also heard at this meeting about the need to invest fairly significantly in coastal infrastructure. And then I'm struck by your comments about the lack of an overarching federal strategy for the marine economy and for coastal infrastructure. How do all these pieces, why is it so important that we consider this as a system as opposed to looking at the different parts separately?
Well, I think one reason is that our coasts are resilient and have been resilient. We have relied on them to protect us from the ocean and storm surge. And you think of ecosystems like salt marshes and eelgrass beds and kelp beds, all attenuate the impacts of storm surge and sea level rise. So thinking about how we best protect them and allow those natural ecosystems to help our coast be as resilient as possible. I think just with regards to the overall framework, Canada has a lot of bits and pieces, but we are not dealing with coasts and oceans comprehensively, and we're not dealing with them actively with the provinces as well. We really need a much more comprehensive framework that allows us to be reactive and have money available when things like Fiona happens, but also really thinking forward into, how do we protect spaces? How do we start to do managed retreat of communities? How do we, plan for fisheries of the future? How do we make sure our marine industries are encouraged to, be part of emissions reductions? That whole knitting together of the bits and pieces we have in other, in different policies across Canada just hasn't been done for the ocean. And we have, the longest coastline in the world. So it seems to me that we should probably start to put that together into an overall climate climate strategy for our coasts and oceans, which to date doesn't exist. And I think that would be, an excellent endeavor that Canada should undertake.
Thank you. Can I try to squeeze one more in, Mr. Chair?
7 seconds.
Really quickly, Ms. Acom, you talked about how historically we've relied on mostly protection as a strategy, and that we also have avoidance, accommodation, and retreat. Retreat, I assume, being at the other end of the spectrum. Do we have adequate guidance on when to choose these different strategies? Like, when do we stop protecting infrastructure and start retreating?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, we haven't really started the discussion in Canada, whereas in the UK, we have shoreline management plans over the whole of the coastline with a strategy for each coast, and that was consulted with the populations. So we have a long way to go.
Interesting. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Backrack. There's no doubt Miss Barron is living through you today. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've heard testimony of the money that has been spent by former governments and the current government, and this government has talked about adaptation and resilience, but we haven't seen that. And we heard testimony earlier this week or last week about small craft harbor that had been rebuilt 2 years ago and was actually destroyed by the storm. So spending money isn't the answer. So it's in designing and engineering, and I think that's your purview, Mr. Lays, more than anything. But question for you, Mr. Lays, is how can small craft harbor construction or repair progress if the tendering authority has not does not have the required funding secured? Is it possible, and if so, how?
That's a good question. What if funding is not available? What you want to do is start out with a project that will allow for future upgrades. For example, if funding is not available to put your wharf at a certain elevation, you want to at least make sure that the structural members to support it are strong enough so that it can be raised in the future. If funding is not available for a big enough breakwater, you want to make sure that it is wide enough and that you have enough clearance in front so that you can augment it later as funding becomes available.
Okay.
And that has to be incorporated in a long-term plan.
Our study is looking at the effects of Hurricane Fiona and the immediate needs for those harbors that have been impacted by Hurricane Fiona and need to move forward with engineering and project tendering. Is that possible if the funding has not been secured?
You would want to look at how the design option with Hurricane Fiona impacts included and without, and look at the costing to see whether the costing can accommodate the upgrade. And if it cannot, then it means that it's vulnerable to future storms such as Fiona.
Okay, I don't think I'm getting the answer I'm asking, or to the answer to the
Sorry
question
about that.
I'm asking. And I forgot to mention I'll be splitting my time with Mr. Bragdon as well. I'll move on to Mr. Barron. In your opinion, if harvesters miss part of or all of the season because of infrastructure like harbors are not safe and functional, what will be the resulting impact on the local economies and the communities that rely on it?
Depending on the amount of time lost and depending on which fishery it is, it'd be substantial, right? And depending on how many vessels will be displaced. Like one of the government wharfs within my town, there's 29 boats that tie up to it, and it's fully subscribed. And the other harbor within the community is fully subscribed. So where are 29 vessels going to go? I mean, they'll get a chance to fish, but where are they going to go for shelter? Where are they going to tie up? So it'd be a significant loss to the community.
Mr. Bragdon now.
You have 1 minute and 40 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just start to you, Mr. Barron. We hear a lot about taxes and taxes in response to hurricanes, but no one's really answered the question how a tax stops a hurricane. But beyond that, beyond the a tax solves everything approach, can you tell us practically, in alignment with what we've heard from others from the region, what steps we can take in adaptation to make sure that our coastal communities are better prepared for what is coming with the inevitable storms that are coming as a result of climate change and what we're seeing? Beyond the tax addresses everything approach, what are the practical steps we can take as a government to address the immediate need of our coastal communities as far as infrastructure goes?
So you're asking how we could build it better? Is that what you're?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I mean, you've heard other witnesses say, talk about the type of material you use, right? But in the intern, where this has to be done quick, you may have to result in using some of the traditional methods, like using rock to build it up higher, getting newer timbers on, and that is in the intern. And unfortunately, that's really the only.
Mr. Barron, just in follow-up to that, do you feel like the response so far has been adequate from the government? Has it been immediate? Are they addressing the urgency of the need for our small craft harbors to be ready for the next season?
I believe they understand the urgency. Is it being addressed in an urgency matter? No, it's not.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question will go to Mr. Lay, I believe I got it right, and then I want Mr. Barron to speak on it. It's suffice to say that successive governments, some more than others, have not spent enough on small craft harbor infrastructure. That's established, that's given. And Fiona has demonstrated what the impact of that would be. My concern now, and recognize the money announced by our government is a first step. We've made that clear. At the same time, the government of Canada set aside $1 billion a couple of weeks ago to accept the cost that's coming from the four provinces under the DFA agreement. Some of the infrastructure Mr. Barron referred to could be covered under this, because if it's not small craft harbors under the Financial Administration Act is the only property that that the government of Canada can spend money on to improve. So it may be a source from there. My question, and it follows that Mr. Small raised, and maybe Mr. Arnold, is the concern I have is we can appropriate money, but it's not going to immediately translate into work getting done. So, Mr. Lay, do you have any recommendations to this committee that would allow a faster process, protecting the taxpayers, public funds, but a faster process that could go from dedicated funding to actual projects getting underway? Because this is one of the frustration I pick up from harbor authorities. Could we use harbor authorities more? So, Mr. Lay, if you could briefly speak to that, from your experience, can you recommend anything to this committee that could speed up the process? Because if there's a lot of money to spend on fixing it up, you have to have contractors in place, you have to have adequate design, you have to have oversight, you have to ensure public funds are spent in the right place. So how do we resolve that conundrum?
I don't have a specific recommendation on that. I know that people are working hard to get these design projects through, and sometimes things can be slowed down in the process of procurement, that's for sure, but at the same time, guardrails have been put in place during the procurement process so that money is spent wisely and that there's oversight. So I would defer that question to infrastructure managers at small craft harbors, because they have a better control and vision as to how things get moved towards the small craft harbor communities.
But that's still, if you could triple the budget today and the work's not going to get done in time, you simply cannot get it out using the existing format of moving it from funding approval to tender design and the work being done. I'm going to go to Mr. Barron. Mr. Barron, could you recommend to this committee, is there a role the local harbor authorities could play to take on more of this responsibility on smaller repairs and design work that could initiate the project faster?
I didn't get the last part because your mic didn't pick up.
Pardon?
I didn't get the last part of your question.
It's just, is there a role that the local harbor authorities could play to speed up the process and get some of this work underway in a more efficient way than the complicated design timelines that the department has?
Yes, I definitely believe, and actually in the case of my community, the two local heavy equipment contractors were pretty much within a week of Fiona coming. They were doing the beach cleanup, moving the rocks that they could, putting the containers back in place. So the local contracting companies and the local harbor authority have worked very well together in a response from Fiona. But when the big project does have to start, the smaller contractors within the community don't have the means, the capabilities, the equipment to do it, right? But in the intern, the harbor authority has been good working with locals to get stuff going.
And can get it done faster? No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. That concludes our rounds of questioning. We did agree to go into committee business for the last portion of our meeting, which takes a few minutes to change over. So I want to say a big thank you to Mr. Barron, Ms. Bakos, and Ms. Aquim. And of course, Ms. Fuller, who's no stranger to the committee, and Mr. Lees, thank you for your time here today and for sharing your knowledge with the committee on this very important topic. So we'll suspend for a few moments, please.